So the Revolutionary War actually broke out before it was officially acknowledged. Why? Because all of the colonies weren't really involved. South Carolina and Georgia wanted nothing to do with the Revolutionary War. You have to understand, we weren't really a country back then. We were separate colonies. They said, okay, fine, Boston's having a problem. They're fighting the Boston Tea Party. They don't like what the British are doing. We're selling all this cotton to Britain. We go to war with Britain, we're going to go broke. So why do we give a damn? Let's spend a little bit talking about July 4, 1776. The revolution had already begun, quite frankly, in New England, specifically Boston and the surrounding areas. Boston was taking on the British. It hadn't exploded into a full revolution yet, but that's where it was going. In Boston, we had tremendous patriots. You had Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams was sort of the leader of the secret movement, spies at the time. You had his cousin John Adams, who wasn't that prominent early on in the revolution, but became so. You had, of course, John Hancock. You had Paul Revere. And you had a doctor named Joseph Warren, who I've talked about but gets no attention whatsoever. But it's very interesting. In New England, early on when the war broke out, before 1776, Dr. Joseph Warren was known better than George Washington. Matter of fact, most people didn't know who George Washington was up to that point. And Joseph Warren was a doctor. He was in his mid-30s. He was well known and well liked, and he was a leader of the revolutionary movement in Boston and in Massachusetts. He was fairly well to do, didn't have to lead any revolution, but he did. And he and others put their lives on the line. And when the revolution broke out, you had the Battle of Lexington, the Battle of Concord, and that was followed by the Battle of Bunker Hill. And within Bunker Hill, you had Breed's Hill. And on Breed's Hill, the colonists dug in. The volunteers and the so-called regular army, of which there was almost none, they dug in because the British were coming. The British had come, and a massive armada had come. And their goal was to put down everything that had been taking place in Boston and growing in New England. And the king sent his redcoats, his army, the most powerful military on the face of the earth, to put an end to it as soon as he possibly could. And on Bunker Hill, we'll call it, that battle, the problem was that the colonists didn't have enough gunpowder. There was a letter written to what they called the Congress of New York, the legislature there, begging them for gunpowder. I had that letter. It was signed by Joseph Warren and two others. That letter is now in the hands of Hillsdale College, and I believe it's on display in their Washington, D.C. campus, along with other documents that I've given to them. And you read that, and you look at that, and you really think about the men who wrote it and signed it, who put everything on the line, everything they had, including their lives. The British were brutal, brutal. Even though they would line up and fight in the way that they did, they were brutal to their prisoners of war. Nearly half of all the colonists who died during the Revolutionary War died on prison ships, British prison ships. They ate rancid food. They died in their own fecal matter. There was tuberculosis, horrendous deaths as they were in the bowels of these ships, these big prison ships that would be anchored off the coast of Boston, New York, and down further south as time went on. This revolution breaks out, this battle took place, and this is all before George Washington got involved as the commander of the forces, the army. And that battle, the Battle of Bunker Hill, is a very famous battle. You've heard about it. And so what happened was the British, long story short, they charged up the hill to try and take the Yanks. Well, our people, our forces, the colonists, they were dug in. The first wave of British suffered significant casualties. The British, say what you will, they were very brave, these men. They made another try, suffered more casualties. And at that point, the Patriots ran out of gunpowder. They ran out of gunpowder. And so some of them stood firm at the front line, others were ordered to retreat for another day, not knowing what would come of them. And Joseph Warren, Dr. Warren, insisted on staying on the front line. He was a wanted man. They knew who he was. So the third charge is made, and the Americans are overwhelmed. They fight hand-to-hand combat. And one of the higher-ranking British officers, as they were charging up the last time, saw Joseph Warren, aimed his pistol at him, and at nearly point-blank range, shot him between the eyes. And so as not to make a martyr out of Dr. Joseph Warren, they would cut him up into pieces, and they would burn what was left of him. Many days after, as the American forces went back to Bunker Hill to collect the bodies, the arms, whatever they could find, where was Joseph Warren? Well, it turns out they not only cut him up, set him on fire, they urinated on him, and all the rest of it. They were brutal. But they knew enough to know where Joseph Warren had died and how he died, because he had some iron in his teeth. You know, obviously they didn't have the kind of material that we have today. His dentist, such as it was Paul Revere, who was a smith, a metalsmith, an ironsmith. And he made swords, he made pots, he made pans, and he was one of the great metalsmiths of that period. So he would make the equivalent of teeth, so when somebody had a tooth pulled, they would insert that. Paul Revere was able to determine that that was Joseph Warren because he had one of Paul Revere's teeth. I tell you that as a personal example, not personal to me, but a specific example of what took place. So the Revolutionary War actually broke out before it was officially acknowledged. Why? Because all of the colonies weren't really involved. South Carolina and Georgia wanted nothing to do with the Revolutionary War. You have to understand, we weren't really a country back then. We were separate colonies. They said, okay, fine, Boston's having a problem. They're fighting the Boston Tea Party. They don't like what the British are doing. We're selling all this cotton to Britain. We go to war with Britain, we're going to go broke. So why do we give a damn? There were many, many divisions. And so there was a meeting of the Second Continental Congress, with delegates from all the colonies came. They needed to make a decision to raise an army. They decided they would. They needed to make a decision who would lead that army. It was Washington.
For all this and much more, sign up for LEVIN TV.